Okay, let's get started with a few housekeeping items. My name is Jamie Belanger, and I will be bringing you through the XCM PM integration best practice webinar today. If you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box or the questions box within the GoToWebinar window. I'll be checking back there frequently to see if anybody has any open questions. This webinar, you cannot speak openly over the line, so please feel free to add in any questions or chat items that you would like to discuss. If we do not have time during this session to answer all of the questions, we will be tracking those questions in chat through GoToWebinar, and we will be sure to reach out to you shortly after the session is over. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to discuss today. In this session, we're going to go over the basics of the practice management integration with XCM when it comes to client and time. This is solely for the purpose of practice management integration. An access webinar could come out at a future date, but this is really going to discuss the practice management access to the XCM application. This is not a sales demonstration, so if you're looking for sales information, you may want to reach out to your sales rep. This is more so designed for the clients that are currently using the integration, how they can prepare for the upcoming tax season and ensure that their client data is clean and up to date and accurately reflecting in the XCM application. With the agenda, we're going to talk about import or excluding clients that are currently in your practice management application, and if you need them inside the XCM application, and what to do if you can't find those clients on the import or exclude utility. We'll talk about adding new locations. If you add a new location inside the practice management application, you're going to need to link it to the XCM application as well to be able to see those clients. We'll have a discussion about the schedule automatic synchronization and what makes sense for your firm with the frequency of those automations. We'll talk about staffing changes and how they relate to the data found in the XCM client database and the option to have them pushed out to active tasks. We'll discuss the account number changes. And that's going to depend on your version of practice management that you currently have, which path you want to take. We'll talk about this PM service code mapping. That's directly related to the time integration. If you're adding service codes or if you're modifying service codes, you're going to want to make sure that you're making updates to them so that the time will come over appropriately by utilizing the utilities that are made for that. We'll also talk about troubleshooting time that's not posting to XCM. If you can't see the time that's coming over, you're expecting time to come over. What would be the reasons your time would not possibly flow into the XCM application? So we're going to start off with the import or exclude utility. So what do we want to look for if a client does not display on the import or exclude utility? I added a brand new client today into the practice management application, and then when I go to pull it into XCM, I'm not seeing it. It's not available for me to pull in. The required fields for your client to appear in the XCM utility, where you make that vetting decision, yes, this is an active client and I want to pull it into XCM, or no, this is not a client we will be tracking through the application. You want to look for the fiscal year end month and the entity type. These are typically located under the profile description, but depending upon your setup, you may actually see the entity type inside the client detail page. The entity type also needs to be mapped to a corresponding XCM task type. So if you have started to track new entity types inside the practice management application, You're going to want to make sure that you have mapped those over to the XCM application. If they're not mapped, XCM will not recognize this type of a client. We also want to make sure that your clients are active or in a hold status. If the clients are labeled as inactive or active prospects or inactive prospects, they are not taken into consideration inside the XCM vetting utility, and you will not be able to import them into the application. The office location is required as well. And this seems to be a big hang-up. With firms that have one office location, they seem to forget that they need to add this to their clients' profiles. It is a required field. The no selection option is not available to bring into the XCM application. So you want to make sure that every single one of your clients has an office location inside their profile. Otherwise, you're not going to see them on that import or exclude utility. And of course, that office location also needs to be mapped. So if you do have multiple offices, let's say you just took on a new office, a new acquisition, you created the new office location, you want to make sure you're applying it to the new clients that you have established. But you also want to make sure there's an office location that corresponds with it in the XCM application and that has been linked. The entity type mapping will give you the ability to see the entity types at a task-driven or task type level. And we want to make sure that they're broken out to match a task type inside the XCM application, and it's just one task type. Here is an example here where I have the entity type corporation, and it is mapped in the bottom screenshot. This is the bottom screenshot showing that the corporation external entity type from practice management is mapped to the 1120 corporation. Any client you establish underneath the corporation will come through to XCM as an 1120 client. You want to make sure that if you are tracking your 1120 S Corps, that they are also uniquely identified inside the practice management application. If you code them for a corporation, they certainly will show up in the import or exclude utility and can be pulled in, but they're going to be pulled in under an 1120 Corp. This is an example of how you want to map over your external locations to your internal locations. The XCM locations are listed on the left-hand side of the screenshot at the bottom of the screen, and your external office name is listed on the right. If you have multiple office locations inside the practice management application, it is okay to map them to one XCM location. Those do not have to be an exact match. So you can track multiple offices in practice and bring them over and consolidate them into one XCM office location. Let's talk a little bit more about adding a new location. Adding a new location inside the practice management application is fairly simple under the administrative account. You can go underneath the offices and add in any office location you would like to start tracking. But what you want to do with the XCM component is send an email to the XCM support group, which is support@xcmsolutions.com, to create your new office location inside XCM if one is needed. If you are creating a new practice management office location and you don't need a new one, you can skip to the second bullet point. You want to map out your new location using the location office mapping utility, where you're going to choose the XCM location and the external location and match them up. One thing to pay special attention to is the renaming of your office location. Inside practice management, if you rename an already linked office location, you decide that you're going to change your naming convention for your offices, the link will actually break behind the scenes between the practice management application and XCM. There is a staging database that has been created in your network where the information from your practice management application is pushed down to, and XCM will reach in and grab that information. That staging database will also need to be updated. The naming convention for your external office location needs to be updated in there as well. And our IT folks can do that within just a few minutes to ensure that there's no interruption to your service. And you can immediately pull in any new clients with that renamed office location. Please keep in mind the support fees included with any new locations added to XCM. So you'll want to talk with your sales rep if you are going to add any new locations into the XCM application. Next up, schedule automatic synchronization. The schedule synchronization gives you the ability to set up a frequency, the user-defined schedule of when you want the updated data to come into the XCM application. This is updated data to existing linked clients. This is independent of any brand new clients that you add to your practice management application. Those are immediately available inside the import or exclude utility. The synchronization here is for you to add a schedule to pull over changes to client profiles that are already linked. I have a client where we updated an email address or a phone number. When you make those adjustments inside the practice management application, you will see them reflected inside XCM during the next scheduled synchronization. The utility is designed for you to add jobs up to 24 a day on an hourly basis. Most firms will establish 3 to 4 throughout the day. They feel that it may be too much or excessive to be pulling these through on an hourly basis, but you can certainly set your own frequency. It does not slow down the application or have any impact on your workflows that are currently in process. It happens behind the scenes. When you go into this utility and click on the Add Job option, you're going to be able to select certain fields that you want to pull over. The fields are identified, as you can see here, under the Select Fields for Update. Some of these fields are required fields, but the staffing, for example, can be omitted. Your initial import can include certain staff into your client database, but any updates made to practice management in those staffing roles going forward could be omitted if you wanted to deselect any of the roles here, with the exception of the responsible person. That is a required field. Now, the automatic synchronization and the bulk update are sometimes confusing. What's the difference between the two? You may have noticed that you do have the option to set up your synchronization, but you've also seen a utility out there that's called the bulk update. I don't know which one I should choose. The automatic synchronization is the schedule you want to be using on a daily basis at least once a day. During your initial setup, the XCM team had established at least one synchronization for your firm, and you can continuously add as many as you'd like or remove them. What that does is it looks for any changes made to your client profiles in practice management and brings them into the XCM client database. One thing to keep in mind is when you make a change to the client profile in practice management, the entire client profile is pushed through to XCM, and your new XCM profile will reflect an exact match. If you had discrepancies between your practice profile and your XCM profile for one reason or another, you may have had a difference in names, for example. You may have linked the applications after you were already using XCM, and you know that the naming conventions were a little different. When you make a change to that client profile, whatever you have in the practice management profile will come over and override the XCM information. Now, the synchronization is looking for changes made to profiles. What the bulk update does is it's an on-demand option for you to say, I want to review and override every single profile in XCM with the current practice management profile. I want to override so there are no discrepancies. And I want you to look at the profile regardless if there is a change to the practice management profile. So again, the automatic sync is going to look for changes that you actively have made in the profiles in practice management. The bulk update is a discrepancy review. There may have been no changes, but every single client has been reviewed, and if there are discrepancies, the XCM data is replaced with the current practice management information. This does take a little while, especially if you have a large number of clients inside practice management and in XCM. So you may want to run this, the bulk update, in the afternoon and let it run overnight and then check back to see if it's been completed. But you want to be very careful if you're going to utilize this option. You don't want to override any discrepancies that your firm has made the conscious decision not to update. If you feel that your practice management application isn't the current and up-to-date details when it comes to your client profile, you probably don't want to use the bulk update ever. Now, the bulk update has its own utility, and it is not reversible. So we want to make sure before you hit that bulk update button that you are absolutely certain that that's something that you want to do. Again, it will go in and look for all of your linked client profiles and look for any discrepancies inside those profiles that don't exist in XCM, and it will pull that information and override the current XCM profile. This integration is always a pull out of the practice management application and into the XCM application. XCM will never make changes to your practice management profiles. Okay, before we hop into the slides moving forward with staffing changes, I just wanted to pause for a moment to see if we had any questions within the questions window or inside the chat window. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type those in at this time. Okay. Well, that is a good question, Daniel. Is there a way to get a report of discrepancies found in the bulk update? Unfortunately, there's no way to report on that. The validation and the actual pull of the data will immediately override the information inside XCM. So you never actually have the opportunity to say, let me see what the discrepancies are before I pull them into XCM. The only way you would be able to do that would be, a manual analysis, pulling out the XCM client database and then your practice management database and doing a comparison using pivot tables or VLOOKUPs to identify that information inside Excel. Okay. All right. So let's move forward with staffing changes. Staffing changes. Employees must have a valid email address in the practice management employee profile, and it must match the XCM login for the same employee. This is very important, and firms are fantastic about updating this information when we're rolling out the initial integration, but we seem to forget about it once we have new employees coming on board. Let's say we hire 15 new employees right before, busy season, and we create them inside the practice management and XCM application. We might notice that their information is not coming over in the maps fields when it comes to staffing or when it comes to the time integration. The main reason you won't see their names appear is because they do not have a corresponding email address inside the practice management application. It's required in XCM because it's your login, but the email address in the employee profile is what's actually identifying that person as a person when the data comes into the XCM application. If you make changes to a profile and the staffing on that profile inside practice management, the changes will flow through as long as that field has been mapped over to XCM. If you feel that the user's name should be pulling over to XCM, we validated that they had an email address stored in the proper spot and it 100% actually matches the XCM login. The next step would be to verify the mapped field in the View Client Entity Detail mapping and ensure that they actually have a mapping. Now, this is a little cryptic. It does provide you with the XCM information, the data fields, and the external data fields. And it's all the behind the scenes development information, not really truly your naming convention. For example, if you do rename your fields inside XCM when it comes to staffing, or you rename your fields inside practice management when it comes to staffing, you're not going to see those labels in here. This is when you want to reach out to either support or reach out to your consultants and say, I believe that this field is mapped. Can you tell me which one it should be related to? And we'll be able to point you in the right direction. Now, if the fields are mapped appropriately, the names will come over into XCM and it will flow through during the next scheduled synchronization if it's an existing client. So if you're importing a brand new client, you'll notice it immediately when you go into the import or exclude utility. You'll notice that person's name in that staffing role should appear there. If you make a staffing change to an existing profile, it will come over during that next scheduled synchronization. It will update the XCM client database, and this option inside the integration utilities allows you the ability to say, yes, I want this to also push out to all of my active tasks. There are pros and cons to adding this on. If you share responsibilities across multiple people, differentiated by the actual job on the task, you may not want to turn this on. For example, I might have the client where we have, let's say, an in-charge, and the main in-charge is updated inside practice management. It's mapped inside XCM, and it comes over and it updates the XCM client profile. That's the person who's considered the in-charge of the entire client. But when you're looking at the tasks, they may cross multiple service lines, and the in-charge at the service line level may differ. If that's the case, you don't want that update to be pushing out to your active tasks because it's going to override the service line in charge with the main in charge that you're adding into that client's profile. If the in charge is consistent across the board, regardless of where the task is, what service line is working on it, then you can certainly have this update and push out to all of your active tasks as well. If it is not pushed out to your active tasks and you need to make staffing assignment changes at the task level, you're going to want to utilize the utility that will allow you to manage your staffing assignments in bulk. It's called the Managed Staffing Assignment Utility, and it'll allow you to search for tasks, actual tasks, and relabel who's in those specific roles. You're most likely already utilizing that because not all of your roles are coming from practice management. The main roles that come from the practice management application are the responsible person or the partner in charge or possibly the management roles. But when it comes to who's going to be preparing and who's going to be reviewing, you're not tracking that level of detail inside practice management, not inside your client's profile because it changes all the time. It's inside the task, and those aren't mapped usually. You have the ability to bulk update those inside the Managed Staffing Assignment utility as well. Okay, before we hop into account number changes, I'm just going to pause again to see if anybody has any questions. Again, feel free to enter your questions in the questions box or the chat box. All right, let's dive into account number changes. All right, account number changes with the practice management version 2017 and below. These versions did not allow you to modify the client account number inside the practice management application. So if you were going to renumber your database, you would need to close out your existing client database and recreate your client database with the new client numbers. In XCM, the updates would not reflect because they're not the profiles that XCM is linked to. So what you would need to do inside XCM as well is modify the existing client profiles. In XCM, we do allow you to change your account numbers, and we can assist. Our data services team can absolutely assist if you need to go through a renumbering project where we're just changing your client account numbers. We're not creating any new profiles, we're just updating those. When you create your new profiles in practice management, we would also want to unlink everything that is currently linked together and then relink after the account numbers in XCM have been changed to exactly replicate what you have in practice. So basically what we have to do is turn off the service, make the modifications to the XCM client account numbers and create your new client database inside practice, disabling all of the current existing clients, and then we link them back together. It is very important to make sure you are not importing the new profiles. If you import the new profiles, they will create a duplicate client inside the XCM application. They already exist. But when you're creating those new profiles, if you go into the import or exclude utility, XCM is going to say this is a brand new client. It's not an XCM because it's not linked with a client account number that we're used to. If you import it, you will have multiple clients inside XCM. So my first recommendation is to contact the support line or your consultant for assistance. We are more than happy to help you through this process to make sure that it goes seamless. We want to make sure that you're not creating duplicate accounts in XCM. It is harder to clean it up than it is to assist in the front end. So please make sure you do reach out if you do have a project like this coming down the pipeline. Now with the practice management version 2018 and above, you're allowed to change the client account numbers inside practice management. So that's an easy one. You can go inside the practice management profile. You're not replicating or creating another client database. You're just changing the profile. XCM, you still need to change it inside XCM as well, but the client will still be linked. It is not one of the fields that updates during the scheduled sync. The manual effort to update your client's account numbers in practice also exists in the XCM application. So similar to the way it worked up above where we said we need to renumber all of your clients in XCM, still have to renumber them down here in 2018, but your links don't need to be broken. There's no interruption to your service. It is just a data project to make sure that your client account numbers have been changed in both applications. I'm going to pause to see if we have any more questions. Any questions with account number changes? No? Okay. Let's move forward with the PM service code mapping. Service code mapping is directly related to the time integration. The service code mapping in the utility section is a one-to-one match, one service code per XCM task type. You cannot have a service code and delegate it to multiple task types. The way that the time integration works is through a series of mapping and logic. The way that the client is identified is by the client integration. The way that the task is identified to post the time to is through the service codes you use. So you want to make sure that your structure breaks out, for example, those 1120 corporations and the 1120S corporations. The time can only flow through into one task type. You can see that the example that I have here is return preparation and return review. Most firms will map those codes. The purpose of using the service code mapping, the main purpose is to utilize the resource allocation module inside XCM and see who's available to take on more work. Most firms are really only concerned with the preparation and the review time, who's busy when it comes to prep and review, but you can certainly map over any service code if you want the full picture, the full scope of how busy every single employee is within your office. Each service code needs to be mapped to the corresponding task type. If you don't want time to come over for certain service codes, you just don't map them. XCM will never recognize them. You may notice that there is no delete option inside this utility. So if you map one by mistake, no worries. Our IT can take care of that within a few minutes once they receive the request. Just send us the information of the ones you want to be unmapped and they can take care of that for you. Now we're coming into the time integration. Time's not posting to XCM. And what do I do about it? There are a number of reasons why the time would not flow through into the XCM application, and we'll go through the different scenarios. The first one is client linking. We clearly need to know that the client is linked between the two applications for any time to come over. So if you don't have linking between your clients, then the time will never come through. XCM is not going to recognize that time as an active time being posted. The service code mapping that we just touched upon. If you're using a service code that isn't mapped, XCM will never recognize that time. So you want to make sure, okay, well, did we use the proper service code to get this time inside XCM? Review the service code that was utilized. Review your service code mapping to see if it's on that list mapped over to a specific task type. We've touched on the employee profile. Your employees must have an email and a skill level populated. This is probably the main reason why the time won't come over to XCM. With most firms that are submitting tickets to XCM and they say the time's not coming in, it's because of those newer employees and they just forgot that they need to add that email address into their profile. But you also need to add the skill level. Now, what the skill level does is it identifies the roles at the task level that that person could possibly work against. If I am staff level 1, and my skill level says staff level 1, that skill level needs to be mapped over to XCM and may only be mapped over to the preparation role, but if it's not mapped, the time won't come in. If it is mapped, that is the only role in a task where my name and my time will ever be taken into consideration. It will 100% of the time post to that role. It also slims down the noise that could come into play if it could post to a different spot. Somebody put my name in the wrong spot, it won't even go against that role. The skill level mapping is not a one-to-one map because we know we wear multiple hats. I'm a senior, for example. I mostly do review work, but sometimes I have to do prep work as well. My skill level is going to be mapped over to the reviewer and the preparer role. And then once it gets into XCM, logic comes into play where it's looking for my name and it's looking for budgeting hours. But the first step to get it in there is to make sure that I have a skill level in my profile and that it is properly mapped to the XCM application. Now, releasing time, you want to make sure that you're releasing time in a timely manner. The nightly basis is very important to stress to employees, but we know it's not always adhered to. And what XCM will do is it'll go back 5 days on the calendar and look for time that's been posted and released in that time frame. So, for example, today, I can post time for 3 days ago. Oops, I forgot to release my time. I released it for 3 days ago. XCM is going to pick it up in tonight's nightly cycle. If I release it for 30 days ago, XCM is not going to recognize it. Okay, so we do have a question. Okay, if someone enters the wrong amount of time in practice management and the admin changes it for them, does it auto change inside XCM? That is going to depend. If they haven't released it, it won't come over to XCM until it's released. So if you catch it before it's released, no worries. If you're correcting the WIP and the time already exists inside XCM, it will not automatically change inside XCM. you would need to come inside XCM and correct it, meaning if it's on a task, you'd have to adjust that task, or if it has hit the exception report, you would have to modify that exception report and release the time, and clear the exception. Now, there are scenarios where I might have released the time for the wrong client, and we don't realize it until, it gets to the billing department. What is needed there is we first need to, inside practice management, you need to delete it for the improper clients and bill the proper client. So release the time for the proper client. But inside XCM, you still need to clear it out of the client that it did post to. So if the incorrect client has the time inside their task, or if it's inside the exception page, you need to delete that. Now, most of the time it will hit the exceptions, but it can be in your history as well if it's within the past 30 days. You don't have to worry about reposting, because when you release the time to the proper client, that's going to flow through with the normal cycle. You just need to make sure that you're deleting the incorrect time that posted to the incorrect client. All right. So that is the end of the webinar. I hope that I've brought some clarity into what needs to happen to maintain your, your practice management integration from the client and time integration side. If you do have any issues, please make sure you're reaching out to either the support at xcmsolutions.com or the consultant that is currently assigned to your account to get clarification on that. Now is the time to look into making sure that all of that information is properly posting. Let's say, you're releasing your time now. The last thing you want to do is, if you're a tax group on the line today, is wait until the middle of a tax season to realize that things haven't been going as smoothly as you thought because some service codes were missed or some, skill levels weren't applied. So doing a quick review, today before your mid-busy season could save you, a big headache in the long run. Looks like we have another question. Okay, so what effect, if any, do projects have on XCM in terms of staffing and time validation? The answer is no impact. You are 100% correct. If you're using the project module inside the practice management application, there is zero impact. Like if you're billing towards a project, it's irrelevant when the time gets posted inside the XCM application. And if you change staffing inside that project, again, it's irrelevant once the time comes over to XCM. It's the integration is 100% client profile driven here. And the time that comes over is also driven by that client profile. So you are correct. There is no impact when it comes to the project. And if you are utilizing that project module, you will not have any issues or side effects from updating that data. All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, thank you for your time today. And again, remember, we are here to help you. Support at xcmsolutions.com or reach directly out to your consultants if you do have any questions in the future.